We've seen in the history of Chassidim, not everyone stayed within a very narrow frame. These radical ideas of Tanya,
Right.
Of individuality, it's got the potential to be very disruptive. Chabad Munt Pnimius. That's what we're trying to get people to do. And all of a sudden, someone says, "Okay, I'm going to be a Pnimi. I'm going to be just like I'm going to be me."
Right.
And then everyone, "Oh no, don't." We didn't mean ad kedei kach. We didn't mean so much.
Welcome to Homesick for Lubavitch, a podcast where we explore Lubavitch identity in the year 2023. My name is Bentzi and I will be your host. Let's begin. Alrighty, this is very exciting for me. This is very exciting for Homesick for Lubavitch. Homesick for Lubavitch is going international. The epidemic has now become a pandemic. It's official. So I'm here with Rabbi Ruben Lee in Cambridge. It's not part of London. Cambridge, United Kingdom. It's its own nice little beautiful city, 2 hours north of London. He's a shliach at Cambridge University. And the story behind this trip is that I bought this book that was printed by Bloomsbury Press, a book by Ruben Lee, and the book was so expensive that I found out later it included a ticket to England. But the bad news is that all those tickets have been used up, so now you just buy the book by itself. But kidding aside, I really wanted to speak to Reuven about both what he wrote in his book, but a lot of the ideas and the experiences behind the book. So, one of the things that you spoke about in the book that was really, really beautiful was your relationship with Rabbi Greenglass in Montreal. And very touching was how you described how Rabbi Greenglass wrote down the entire Hemshech of RaNaT before he ran away from Otvatsk. I'd like you to tell that story, but I think maybe first give a little bit of a background of how you ended up in Montreal in the first place. Where do you come from? Whence does your British accent originate? And we'll get going.
Okay.
Just one short disclaimer for those watching. There is a bottle of L'chaim on the table, and that's not something common to the podcast on purpose. It's usually stay away from the need for L'chaim or anything that would be associated with that. But tonight is Fart Chav Kislev, and we felt that it made sense to have a shtickle fabringen. So let's start with the L'chaim.
So thank you very much for coming all the way.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I'm a big fan of the podcast. One of your dedicated listeners. I consider it an honor.
Oh, no.
And also slightly nerve-wracking to become exposed in this way to a wider audience. So where did it all start? I grew up in a suburb of London called Ilford, which technically is part of the county of Essex. And at a young age, I became Baal Tshuva. I was about 11 years old.
You or your whole family?
Myself, individually. Some members of my family later also became Baal Tshuva, but at the time it was a personal choice. And through a whole string of events, it was fortunate that I was able to be by the Rebbe before my Bar Mitzvah in Tofshin Beis, which was a transformative moment.
For your Bar Mitzvah or before your Bar Mitzvah?
Just before. I went a couple of weeks before my Bar Mitzvah.
So it was like a trip
to
prepare for your Bar Mitzvah?
Yeah, a Bar Mitzvah trip.
And that happened to be Nun Beis?
That was, Nun Beis. Cheshvan Nun Beis.
Wow.
And at 16, I went to Yeshiva. So I was in a regular local school, a state school. And I managed to persuade my parents to let me give up on all the trappings that come with being in the school and going through that trajectory. And I went to Manchester for a couple of years. And then from Manchester, I went to Montreal for another couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
So I did 4 years of Zal before going on Shlichus New Haven. So I'm 70, marriage, Shlichus.
Oh, so you also did Shluchs in New Haven.
Yeah.
You're the second alum on the podcast.
Oh, because who else?
Moshe Leigh also.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
He was after me, I think.
Yeah.
He's the year after me, I think.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah, so I was in Montreal. I've been trying to think how I ended up in Montreal because none of my class in Manchester were going. I went pretty much by myself.
But before you go there, why don't you just? I don't know if we want to make this whole conversation about your origin story, but I think it is important. I think it will be important for later on. Why does an 11-year-old in Ilford, England, Ilford, you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why does an 11-year-old get interested in Yiddishkeit and Lubavitch in particular?
It's pretty hard to analyze an 11-year-old.
Sure.
And to remember even.
Right.
It seemed very normal and natural at the time. I'm not entirely sure what the thought processes were.
Your parents were at all traditional, or?
Yeah, traditional. I went to a Jewish day school.
Right. Okay.
So, and my teacher was a Lubavitcher.
I see.
And I mean the spark that triggered everything. We were a very good class. A lot of my class became Bali Tshuva. Not through Lubavitch necessarily, but we were a very my class, the class above me, class below me. Those years in the school were very successful, if you want to call it that. Of kids coming through, becoming much more interested in Yiddishkeit. We had a couple of Lubavitcher teachers in the school, and they had a big impact. And we had because we were doing so well, we had an advanced class. Like we had a special class for the advanced students, like 10, 11-year-olds. We were learning Chumash Rashi. We were doing things that day school kids weren't doing. We were learning with Rashi script and everything. We were a little bit more into things. And we had like an end of year Shabbaton. And I remember on the coach, we went to Bournemouth for Shabbaton. On the coach home.
Who to the Alpraviches or nothing to do with Lubavitch?
Nothing to do with Lubavitch.
Right.
And my teacher came to like the back of the bus where we were all hanging out and said, I set you a challenge to try and keep Shabbos this coming week the same way you did this week.
This is a Lubavitcher teacher. Do you want to say his name?
Yeah, sure. Rabbi Zali Unstoffer, who I'm eternally grateful for.
He lives in London today?
He now lives in, Northwest London. And so that's what the challenge he set to us, to a few of the kids. And as I say, quite a lot of the kids became Bali Tshuva. So I remember coming home, so we used to always have like a challah Friday night. Right. We'd have like one challah. So I had to get my mother to buy 2 challahs. We'd have kiddush and stuff. And it just meant like not watching TV that Shabbos and going to shul, just doing a bunch of things that adjusting and adapting. Right. And I liked it. And I continued. And we had when we finished school, we continued having a shir with Rabbi Unsdorf in his house, shir Gemara. So there was a whole bunch of kids that came together. We had a shir Gemara in his house.
Wow.
I remember we had a Shabbaton in his house. This is a very strong memory. And it was during Shnas HaTzadik. And he made an effort to teach us all Shuvah.
The Niggun of Shuvah.
So we all had like Siddurim and Tehillims out. And he's like teaching us the words and he's getting very excited. And just the chayas about Shuvah was very, it's just inspiring. I also went to Gan Yisrael.
Hey, so
Gan Yisrael was also very inspiring.
That wasn't Chavzan. That was before Chavzan Adar, no?
Yeah.
That was before Chavzan Adar.
That was the year.
Before?
Yeah.
And you went to Gan Yisrael here?
No, I went to Gan Yisrael. Gan Yisrael overnight camp was also very...
here in England?
Yeah. That was also... We had a camp reunion. I remember camp reunion. This was already after my bar mitzvah. So this was a winter camp reunion in Manchester, Toshin Base.
Wow.
The atmosphere, it was very special. So I was already in by then. But.
No, I don't think it makes sense to necessarily dwell on this for too long. But just what strikes me right away is that story, that recurring theme of the teacher and the child, and it's painstaking work. Like it's there's no event with a lot of people. It's like there's one teacher and one individual, but it's also so often the most enduring.
Oh yeah.
And like the amount of even today that are shluchim or very, very devoted Lubavitchers, very proud Lubavitchers that were literally just a student of a teacher who cared. It's just such an amazing story. I mean, it's an amazing thing to think about. So you were kind of on your way. You one thing led to another, and then eventually your parents realized they lost you.
Right. No, it was difficult. Secondary school, I went to sort of a non-Jewish school.
I understand, but the
that was a
goal was to
different
eventually the goal was eventually for you to go to college, I imagine.
Yeah, yeah.
So eventually they realized, okay, they lost you. You're off to Montreal.
Right. So first to Manchester, then off to Montreal.
Right.
And yeah, Montreal was I don't know. Montreal for me, I mean, I feel anyone who knows me is watching or listening to this, they're going to just like laugh. But I have a very romantic view of Montreal. It did something for me.
Don't go back is my suggestion.
I actually was there a few weeks ago. I went back for the first time in 20 years.
We'll get to that in a second.
It's still special. I know everyone warned me, says it's not like it used to be.
No, in general, going like revisiting romantic years of your youth is always dangerous. But yeah, so go ahead.
So there was a lot of characters in Montreal that really, really affected the way I'd had this background. I'd been to the Rebbe, so I had like sort of at least like that type of. I wasn't like a fresh Baltriver that didn't have any awareness.
And by the time you get to Montreal, it's already after Gimel Tammuz?
Yeah. We're already...
because you had been through the whole high school. Right,
yeah, so I went to Montreal in 97.
Right, a few years after Gimel Tammuz, okay.
And I got to meet and engage with Reb Volf Greenglass. And he took a liking to me. I was like a shtickle masharis. I helped him walk backwards and forward to Yeshiva. It was slippery with the ice, and he was just very kind, generous, and loving and caring, very caring. I'm not saying a lot of the other people in Nanhala were also. We're focusing in on that relationship, and I just found him to be such a unique type of character. He had such personality and such individuality. The way he dressed, like he didn't lose his Polishness, or we call that his Polischkeit. He was still very much, an outsider, if you know what I mean, but such an insider. He was the real deal. He was like, so engaged with the Rebbe, such a close relationship. But there was a certain, he retained his personality, his individuality. It wasn't the version of Lubavitch, which so many people talk about, which is like sort of this absolute Kabbalah cell to the point of the erasure of self. It was a Kabbalah Earl, which was honest about who he was, what his personality was like, and it was utilized. And he was a totally übergegeben. It wasn't like a lack of übergegebenkeit.
Right.
But it wasn't in a narrow style. He had a certain breite cook. When it came to sort of the types of nigunim he would sing, or the types of stories he would tell, or just how he functioned as a chassid was very attractive.
Right. It's almost like there's Kabbalah Soil as an idea, and then there's Kabbalah Soil as a demeanor. Right. It's like two very different things. Like, how many people are happy in concept, right, but not very happy in demeanor? And it's like, like that guy who, like, every time you see them, they have to give like this goofy smile because they're happy. Right. And it's like, yeah, but that doesn't resonate, man. It doesn't feel real.
He was a real Baal Aveda. He was a Baal Yisurim. He endured tremendous suffering over his life. Always besimcha, working on himself. And he just showed me a lot of attention, and I appreciated that. So one day I was walking him home, and he invited me into his house, and he picks off the shelf this like little booklet, and in it he has the first 4.5 maamorim of RaNaT. So he got to the middle of Lulav Arava before they had to leave in the morning. Right. And he described how, like, he knew they were going to leave, and he didn't want to go without Chassidus. He felt like and so he started writing out the maamorim. And so just when I was in Montreal.
But one second, because I know I mentioned it earlier, but set the table a little bit. he was in the Tvatsky Yeshiva right in Poland when the Nazis came into Poland, and they all basically escaped to Shanghai, right?
Well,
To
eventually.
Japan, and
Through
then
Vilna. Yeah,
but that's when they started escaping, eventually ending up in Shanghai, right?
Yeah.
How long had he been in Lubavitch at that time?
I don't know. I don't know the history. You can look it up
Right.
in the books. He probably came to Lubavitch in Tzadik Dalet, Tzadik Hey.
So not that long
5
before.
years.
Yeah.
He was already 5
No,
years.
no, I think it's important to the story, not just like to be like pedantic. It's just like I think it's important to the story. Like here's a guy who,
Maybe later. I don't know.
in a way, obviously different, but in a way, kind of like went through a similar journey as you did. Maybe not as extreme, but also like came to it from the outside. And
Maybe.
I think it's just important to point out. Talk about a cliffhanger, ending in middle of Lubavitch for 5 years.
Yeah. And so he showed it to me, and one of the beautiful things about this little thing, and he showed me a few of his other books you see as well, like he was very artistic. And so between the mimer, he would do a very like creative sort of divider as part of his just sort of artistic expression. This is like the bombs, like it's being bombed and everything, but he still had time to do a little bit of artistic expression. And so when I was just now in Montreal, I've been nudging his son-in-law for a while. I didn't know if I made this whole story up. You know, sometimes you think, am I just like a fantasor? I could have made this whole thing up. Because I kept asking, and he's like, I don't remember where this is and stuff. And so when I went into Montreal, I pushed him a bit further, and he found it. He sent me pictures. And it was as I remembered it. So I felt at least I wasn't
beautiful,
just making up stories.
Why don't they publish it, like the picture? I mean, I guess it's not that interesting. Like it's the same mimer that everyone sees, but it'd be interesting to see like that flourish. And what a great story.
I'll show you some pictures afterwards.
What a great story. I mean, just like when do you see what's precious to someone? Like when they stay up the night before they're about to escape and run for their lives. It's like, what do I need to take? Like, what would I take if I had to leave everything behind? What would I take? I have no idea. I'm trying to think right now.
It's like that disturbing story of Chaim Razov.
Which is?
When there was the fire.
Right.
Saving the Ksavim.
Right. Or his kid. Okay, I mean, so let's leave that macabre, dilemma aside. Yeah, I most definitely would take my child first.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I mean,
you passed that test with flying colors.
Let's also be honest. Nobody there are too many Sfarim printed as it is. You know what I'm saying? There are not enough kids. Like let's get real. But I'm just trying to think, like, what would I take? What would be my like?
Isn't it the same that I don't know if you're familiar with Desert Island Discs, this sort of famous radio show in the UK where they bring on a celebrity or someone of public interest, and they have this thing: if you were end up on a desert island, which 7 songs are you going to take with you? And so they describe 7 songs that are meaningful to them, and they explain why. And it's a way of telling the story of their life.
Right.
And then at the end, they have to sort of say, okay, you have to break it down to just one song.
Right.
And what is the quintessential song of your life?
Right.
If you're going to be on the desert island, and that's all you're going to have for the rest of your life, which one are you going to pick? Which niggun are you going to pick?
Right. Right. I mean, is it the same? I guess it's the same to a large extent for sure. But this has the added urgency and the added like realness of like a young boy, hoping it wasn't. They were lucky to get out at all. Most people didn't get out. It was like a whole story. I don't know the whole history, but they were lucky to get out. And like Poland was utter chaos. Nobody expected.
I mean, they went first to Warsaw. They went to Warsaw first to see the Frierdiker Rebbe before they left.
Right.
So they had to like get into the crazy situation in Warsaw. And
they left before the Frierdiker Rebbe was rescued?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I guess that's how they got out.
One of the other things they did on the night before was they were boxing up all the Ksavim and Svarim, which ended up later coming.
The Frierdiker Rebbe's Ksavim.
Which ended up getting taken by the Nazis and then taken by the Soviets and stuff.
I mean, that whole story is just, that's for another episode with somebody with a lot of guts. But, and somebody who knows what happened. But, yeah, I mean, it's just like, I guess I'll think about it and get back to everybody on the next episode. What would you write what would you like record if you knew you have only 6 hours? Because what's also interesting about that story is that he had like 6-7 hours to get his stuff together, right? So you have limited time, you have limited resources. What do you take with you?
I mean, that's what's so special for me. What was impactful about the story is how it gave me a completely new sense of priorities.
Right.
About the role that Chassidus plays in a person's life. That it's not just this sort of nice additional adornment to the way you are, but it's something that is so fundamental that the idea of being on the road for such a long time and detached from those Oisius Arav and the Oisius Aksav, just like that's a shocking sort of future to think of. And it made me seriously think in a way that I'd never done before. And, about the importance of Chassidus and how to sort of like treat this thing. I found it interesting. I enjoy Chassidus, and it was meaningful to me. I'd made significant changes in my life because I found Chassidus attractive. But there's still a way in which it can just be compartmentalized as part of your broader,
right.
Just trying to indulge yourself in a way, like being the best type of person you want to be. But it's all about who you want to be.
Right.
It's not seeing.
It's just a safer. It's just a safer at the end of the day, right? That's how you say it. It's just a safer.
Even if it's more than that, but it's a safer that's, that I'm. It's all about how this safer can enhance my life. Whereas what I got from this is that there's not even the cheshbon.
Right.
You're not considering him. It's just about this is who I am.
Right.
This is me.
Right.
I mean, I'm not leaving without myself. So why am I going to leave without the chassidus?
Yeah, I have to tell you.
That made me rethink.
Yeah, I mean, I have to tell you, when I read that story in your book, it gave me goosebumps. It like reframed the whole thing for me. Did I start learning a maamorim right after that? No, I didn't. I have learned a little bit of RaNaT since then, but no, it's what a story. So this Rabbi Greenglass leaves a very large imprint on your life, not just with that one story, but in general the relationship that you had with him. I mean, I don't know if you want to speak more about your time in Montreal, or we can just go, like, using that as a background.
Well, I think the relevant I'm not sure exactly where we're going to end up. I think the relevant...
Nobody knows. Nobody knows. That's the beauty.
I think the strong relevant component of Montreal was I got to see a whole range of Chassidish characters. And what was very prominent in all of their lives was the seriousness. They were constantly trying to figure out the best way to be a chassid. And they were coming up with different things. They weren't all doing the same thing. They weren't coming up with the same answers, but there was a certain sense of struggle.
Right.
But not in a negative way, but like engaged.
Right. People
that were very engaged. Well, I'm not saying the whole of Montreal was very engaged, but the people that I was impressed with. And I saw that as like a model.
Do you have any examples besides Rabbi Greenglass?
So there's Rabbi Greenglass and Rabbi Gerari, Rabbi Gerari, I found to be a fascinating character. Still is. I spent some time with him just recently.
The Mashpia in Montreal, Rabbi Gerari.
He his struggle and his yearning to get to the depth of the meaning of a piece of Chassidus was, inspiring. And in a way, it's like it's not even about like always figuring it out. It's just being so engrossed and engaged, which was, a guide. I saw that as a model that the goal is not to sort of like make sure everything makes sense at the end. The goal is to sort of go deeper and deeper and deeper. So once you've figured something out, that's just a platform to show how there's actually a better understanding. Every understanding is a means to get to a better understanding.
Right.
And that was very impactful. Rebel Mochkin was, I remember a particular Farbrengen that, okay, so I'd been by the Rebbe. So I had a Musik, but his gosh, I was still a kid when I went to. I was before Bar Mitzvah, so I was still childish. I mean, I think I got the etzem of what it means to be a Chassid. I mean, I was by the Rebbe, so I got that whether I liked it or not. But the processing and the hegeshim, what it means to be a Chassid, how to feel what that looks like, the expression of those feelings. I think I got a real sense of a completely new level of Iskashrus relationship, and something that is personal. He was a Bachar in the Yuds. These are people who had personal relationships with their Rebbe, and just vicariously, in a way, seeing how that played out at Fabrengens and what that meant to them was very instructive. It's not like I'm an embodiment of any of those things, but I feel like I gained a vocabulary,
right,
a glossary, maybe even,
right,
of what these words mean.
Right.
If I was to end up in a good place, a lot of it would be shaped by that exposure that I had there.
Sure. And you said also earlier you were talking about Rabbi Nosson Gerari also?
Yeah, so learning Chassidus with Reb Nosson was an eye-opener.
Right. He was a businessman.
He was a businessman.
For those who don't know, just to describe him a little bit. Because there's the famous Rabbi Gerari was a mashpia in the yeshiva.
Yeah, so this is...
this is his uncle? No, this is his cousin.
This is his cousin. So Reb Nosson was a businessman. We used to see him go to the train station every day carrying his briefcase.
Right.
Very put together,
Right.
And then we managed to arrange, his grandson was in yeshiva with us, so he was able to arrange for us to be able to...
Who, Moshe?
Yeah.
Moshe Gerari in Tom's River?
No, Moshe Kesselman.
Moshe Kesselman, I know him too, yeah.
So a group of us went and learned with him. It wasn't for long, and we used to go Friday night in the winter, so we had a lot of time after the meal. And we'd spend a good 2, something, even longer hours sitting there learning. And to this day, I don't think I've ever had a more intense intellectual experience than sitting at that table those Friday nights.
And we're sitting in Cambridge here.
Yeah, I'm just first of all, his teaching style was unique. We'd make someone read a passage from the Maimon.
Right.
And then he'd go around the table asking everyone to explain it.
Right.
And so you knew it was going to come to you. Don't look like an idiot. So you sort of, you're racking you hope you're not the first guy.
Right.
So you're the first guy say something and you don't know what he's talking about. So it's like, nothing was like, okay, goes around. And you knew you had to like perform at your best. Your brain is now in hyper mode.
Right.
Just not embarrass yourself in front of your friends and everything.
Right.
Even you want to impress him as well. Imagine you could say something and nothing would say, good to chat. So you're working so hard. And then after he goes around the whole table, he then gives the pshat, explains it. But in the meantime, you've exhausted all of your intellectual capabilities. And you've become like a clean muksha. Right. Because every angle has now been exhausted from the whole table. And then like a new air comes in.
Right.
and it was just, you felt enriched, enlivened.
Sure.
To concentrate for 2 hours on a Friday night when you're exhausted, you probably bring the whole Thursday night as well.
Right.
You weren't in a good space physically, but it was so good that it wasn't like you were tired or falling asleep. I remember you come out of Montreal in the snow, and we'd been talking for 2.5 hours about Atzilus, and you walk out, it looks like a winter wonderland, and you're like, you feel like you're floating. Like, am I in Atzilus? It's like it was that type of arresting experience. It gave me an inkling. Obviously at the time you're an arrogant bacher, you think this is normal, right? This is where I belong. This is how life is.
Right.
You don't have that sort of foresight to think, wow, this is going to be a foundation for the rest of my life. But I think back, it gave me a sense of, first of all, these different types of chassidim. But the common denominator of all of them was, and all of their diversity in the way they experienced being a chassid, was grounded in Chassidus.
Right.
And there's none of this fluff. If you're not learning Chassidus, then the whole, you've got nothing to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that you've just from that experience that just from the description of Montreal that you're telling me that I'm thinking about. I mean, the last thing you were talking about, Nosson Garari's class. There's this thing about mastery that is at once so humbling to witness, because if you're not a master, you recognize that you're not very quickly. But it's also, in a way, what's most enticing. Even though it humbles you and sometimes humiliates you, it entices you to, like, wait, if this guy can be a master, maybe I can be too. Like, we have this kind of, I think it's like a kind of a cultural thing around the world today, where, like, we're scared to make students feel inadequate or make people feel inadequate. So everything's kind of dumbed down and softened, and, like, let's make sure that nobody feels out of place. And I understand there are sensitivities, and it's wrong for a child to go through school always feeling like it's over their head. I get it. But you wonder at what cost, right? Like, I'll give you an example from, like, a different discipline that just, I think, makes it a little bit more mokshistic, like what you just said, although maybe you don't even need to add. It seems pretty self-evident what you're saying, but pretty well described. But a friend invited me the past couple of weeks to come to a jiu-jitsu class. And the jiu-jitsu class is being led by a fellow who's been doing jiu-jitsu for, I don't know, 30 some years, a master. You call him sensei, like, this guy's a master. At the end of the hour and a half or so, the last 20 minutes is basically everybody gets a chance to what they call roll with the sensei. And he's operating at 10-20%. And you can't lay a glove on him. And the second he decides it's over, he has you in an arm bar. He could kill you, literally. He can kill you in multiple ways. And when you're fighting with him, you're like, oh my God. Like, I'm literally, like, it's humiliating. Not just because other people are seeing you being beaten up, just humiliating when you realize, like there's this thing where, like, this guy is literally light years ahead of you. His 30 years of work has put him in a place that you are just unfathomably behind. But it's interesting that the feeling that I got and everybody else here got was not like brokenness. It was like an excitement. So, like you said, arresting. Like, look at this thing that you could possibly get up to if you put yourself to it. Okay, probably won't, but it's like there's something alluring about something like that. And that's the thing that came to me. It talked about Nosson Garari, where, like, on one hand you felt like, in Yeshiva, maybe you're learning a maamorim and you understood the maamorim and you feel like a hotshot. Look, like, I'm the guy that people come to ask me what this means, right? Like, I'm a Ephesus, and I come to this guy's house and he wipes the floor with me. But instead of making you feel like an idiot, or instead of, like, telling you, like, instead of making you close a book, it makes you open the book even more, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's the hafla. You sort of get a hafla, the wonderment,
right,
of, like, where the possibilities, like the ceiling of my intellectual world,
right,
was just blown open,
right,
and that was just fascinating.
Right.
But I think what you were saying made me think of, like, the difference between atzvus and meridus.
Right.
Like, in a way, it could be the same feeling, but it's how you react to that feeling.
Right.
Is it inspiring? Is it motivating?
Right.
Or is it going to be something that's going to drag you down? Right. And I think there's different personality types. Not everyone is up for that type of encounter. It just happened to work for me. Yeah,
if it's possible that it's your personality, but I do feel like, in a time where it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? We decide that young people, or people in general, don't want to work hard at a discipline for a long amount of time. Therefore, they're going to be turned off by something that needs a long amount of time. Therefore, we're not going to show them that thing in the first place. Therefore, they're not interested. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? They never saw it. And what is Chassidus if not a decision to choose a certain preoccupation and develop a mastery over it?
I mean, you say I'd push back on the idea of a mastery. It's about, I think it's more about just having a degree of Henton feast in the Beis HaMedrash. Like, just to not be a foreigner. I don't know. Mastery is already
No,
maybe
but mastery doesn't mean that you're done. Like this guy in jiu-jitsu, he practices 3 hours a day.
right.
The more they know they don't know. But
Right.
but
Okay, that's what you meant. Fine.
mastery is a proficiency that you kind of
Proficiency. I like it. Yeah, a proficiency.
But I think the word mastery, like master, is like someone who's ahead of you in a very obvious,
No,
clear
that's
way.
always going to be relative. You're going to be ahead of someone.
But in a very
Aleph
clear,
Beis,
obvious way.
You might not know Gimel Dalet, but you know more than someone else. So you a mastery of Aleph Beis.
Okay, look, I'm not trying to
The
separate.
mastery implies, I think, a little bit too much of a, you're on top of it.
Okay, that's not what I meant. Okay, fair enough, though.
But a proficiency, a strong proficiency.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. A mastery to me describes someone who when you look at someone who has mastered the art of tailoring or has mastered the art of filmmaking or like these people, they don't feel like they're done. That's what they keep on coming back for more. So why are they called a master at it? It just seems that at some point there is a level where you reach where your investment is undeniable.
Right. That's the key point. And it requires, and you realize that what that requires is investment. So something Rebbe Meir told me that it shocked me. When he was a bacher, he wanted to learn with his uncle, Reb Moshe Garari. So he went to Eretz Yisrael for a year. And he used to go and learn with his uncle. His uncle was a businessman, just like RaNaT.
Right.
What was the Seder? They would meet up 3 times a week, twice in the week, once on Shabbos. Each time they'd sit for 3 hours.
Wow.
I mean, like, who does that? Like that.
But you know how much?
Why would you even do that for your nephew? Like, what is going on? What is the context where that makes sense? It makes sense. I mean, for them, I don't think that was strange. I don't think they would think we're going to do something like really cool. We're going to sit and learn Chassidus for 9 hours each week for a whole year, and like, no, this is a serious. You're not gonna. It's not a game. It's not like a.
But you ask who does that. Everybody who does jiu-jitsu does that. Just to be clear,
Agreed.
I don't do it. I don't do jiu-jitsu, but not yet at least. But I'm just saying, like.
That's right. The people who go to the gym, the people who do any people who learn a language, they're spending hours and hours and hours. Right. It's a serious, engaged activity.
Right.
So this is not something you sort of tick a box and you do before davening every day.
Right.
Just to sort of feel like you've done Chassidus. Right. It's an ambition. It's a project. There's a lot to get through. Right. And it's not even about kamas. It's just about be'echus. How much you can challenge yourself and the goal is to really transform the way you think, the way you feel, the way you experience life.
Right. And
that is a full body experience. It's a whole.
Right.
It requires thinking. It requires reading stuff. But more of it is about adapting.
Grappling. Yeah. Failing, flailing, embarrassing yourself. Making mistakes.
But the question you have to ask yourself, I think, is this going to be part of is this a project of my life?
Right.
Do I take this seriously? Is this what I'm... This is what I koch in. This is what I care about. And I think I was fortunate to be exposed by people who were like that.
Right.
And it gave me a model of what that might look like if I tried.
It's so powerful. Yeah, because it's so, like the example. It's not to take anything away from Rabbi Greenglass or Rabbi Garari. Like that's clearly not the point here, or Rabbi Muchkin. But like. There's something about the fact that you said, you were madgish it, that like Nassim Garari was a businessman. His father, Moshe Garari, was also a businessman. It's like, what's the difference? Like, it's because a mashpia, we kind of assume, that's his job. That's what he's paid to do. So that's what he does, right? Whereas a businessman, it's like wait a second. He's not paid to do this. He's paid to do something else. So like he's carving out private time, right? Even if the mashpia also carves out private time, but that's just why it's sticking in the conversation. He's not a
professional Jew,
right? He's not a professional Jew, and it's like wait a second. So this is something that we do outside of the job or outside of the kind of practice of being a Lubavitch, where like you learn Chassidus before davening for a half hour or something. Which I'm not trying to take away from that. Beautiful. If that works for you, more power to you. But it's the same thing between a guy who does jiu-jitsu 2 hours. Like I had friends, so I went to the jiu-jitsu class, and I'm using this as a muscle. I haven't done any of it to like talk about it, but I'm
Homesick for jiu-jitsu.
No, not yet, not yet. But I'm just saying, like, so I went to this class and I'm like, okay, I stink at this. Like, how do I get going? And I asked a couple friends who are much deeper into it, and they're like, okay, you basically need to go 2-3 times a week for 3 hours, and after 6 months, you won't feel like a total fool, right? And so, like, learning Chassidus a half hour a week before davening, yeah, beautiful. I'm saying, like, it's better than nothing. Like, to use that very,
right,
ill-begotten phrase.
But it's not a plan.
It's not a plan, and it's also not the same as really taking it seriously. Like, don't confuse the two. And that kind of leads me to the main point that I got out of your whole Montreal experience, which I think will lead very nicely into the next part of our conversation, which is something that I've thought for so long is, like, yeshivas are so important, right? There's no question about it. And there's no way that you can really avoid the fact that yeshiva is ultimately dominated by the majority of the people in the yeshiva, which is bachrim at that age. So there's a bachrim and there's this small number, relatively speaking, of danhala, but in many ways the atmosphere is dominated by 18-year-olds, which, okay, we were all 18, so we can make fun of them. Like, they're 18. I was also 18. You were 18, and so on. But there's something about the way you're describing Montreal where you saw a mature adult milieu around the yeshiva, and maybe some of them were in the yeshiva also, but there was also outside the yeshiva, and then the inside the yeshiva is interacting with outside the yeshiva. I'm sure there were Fabringans where there's like a kind of bleed between the two. And what that does, and I think you even mentioned it, what that does is it teaches you that it doesn't end when you leave these doors, right? And that's, I mean, I hate to say it, I feel like that's something that's missing today. And it's certainly something that I felt when I was in yeshiva. It's like, I would always say in yeshiva, like, it's important for the mashpia to talk to us, or to talk, when I was a shliach, so I was kind of looking at it from the side. It's important for the mashpia to talk to the bachrim about Chassidus. But you know what's even more important? For the bachrim to see the two mashpiim talking to each other about Chassidus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right?
No, I see that. And if we're gonna then move on to sort of, the experience outside of yeshiva, so life. It took me a while to adapt, and I think especially when you're on shlichus, everything is for the shlichus. So it's like lomad nas the lamid, right?
Right.
Everything you're learning is how, like the maggid. Everything he learns, he thinks, oh, that would be good for the drasha and stuff. So you're learning in the context of what you're going to teach,
right? And
so you then lose your own sort of projects,
right?
And you can become stale,
right?
Because it's you're disconnected from the material. And this wasn't just in Chassidus, in general, in learning. I felt, especially in a place like Cambridge, which is, everyone's studying, everyone's quite scholarly.
Right.
There's a scholarly environment, and I didn't feel scholarly. I felt jealous. I was like, these people are sitting in libraries,
right,
for hours on end, reading books, thinking about ideas, writing essays and stuff, doing stuff that I find stimulating.
Right.
And I'm like organizing Purim parties, right, which were great, and I don't resent it or regret it. But there was a part of my life that wasn't being activated and appreciated,
utilized.
So I remember I remember the moment where I sort of said, it was coming up to Pesach, and I was like, I'm going to spend the next month preparing for Pesach, and all that means, I said, like, it's ridiculous. Pesach will happen however much I prepare for it. I'm going to take a Gvuras Hashem, the Maral, and I'm going to spend 2 hours a day learning Gvuras Hashem. That's
on the Agada, or that's on the Separatism side? That's on the Agada, isn't it? On the Agada, yeah.
So, and I just sort of, I made a kfiyas. I'd go out to a coffee shop, my Gvuras Hashem, and I would just engage with something I'd never read before. I mean, I read the Hakdama because of the Hakdama about Posha B'tachas Pshitzas that was connected to Chassidus. But I just thought, you know what, I'm going to just broaden my horizons, read a new book. Everyone talks about the Maral. I've never really engaged with it. And that sort of like sparked this like whole new thing. And actually, if I'm engaged intellectually in things, I actually became, I think, a more interesting person, shlichus-wise. So I didn't have to like prepare a sikha before an event or before a Shabbos meal, because I've been spending the whole week thinking about ideas and stuff like that. And so it just sort of, negless chachma, it spilled out If you become engaged in learning,
Right.
then your small talk becomes elevated, enhanced, and I think that was sort of a, I think I had it in invested in me from when I was younger about this, seeing what I saw. But it took me a while to express that in my own life afterwards, because I think you just get shlichus can become all-consuming.
For sure.
And carving out sort of a personal identity on shlichus took time. But that I think is at the core of it, about taking these learning pursuits seriously, having a plan, and not just being, as you say, like a box you tick.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's a story of life, right? I mean, like you go out of yeshiva, you start something new. Maybe you think that it's such a seismic change. It's such a seismic shift, where like your daily schedule, your priority list, like everything changes so drastically that it's hard to see how does yeshiva continue in this, right? Like how's there any through line from that life to this life? And so like in terms of format, the format's kind of gone. Yeah, what was the story I remember hearing in yeshiva? Something about how like there's like a balabas who would like every time Seder would happen to him, like he would do something different, and it was like it's hard.
Yeah, but that sounds like
it sounds silly.
I mean, I have no nostalgia.
I'm saying like it's not
like our whole discussion about Montreal is for me not a nostalgia. I don't want to go back there. I don't want to go back there.
Right.
It's not like something
that's
idealized past. I feel like I'm fascinated by the way that can, engage with my present.
Right.
I think I learn Chassidus now with much more maturity,
of course,
and sensitivity.
I would hope so.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's a given.
No, I would say I would hope so, though.
I also hope so, but I don't think it's a given. It's something that you either, some people...
You either develop or you don't. Right.
Precisely.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking earlier about my favorite cultural critic or writer in general, if I was being honest, Christopher Lasch. And in many ways, this kind of helped me formulate the idea of homesick for Lubavitch, because he has this wonderful kind of bit in his book that differentiates between memory and nostalgia. And he says memory is like what you just said, that past that's very real, that's firmly in the past, but it's integrated into who you are. It informs who you are. It nurtures who you are. You go back there for wisdom, for connectivity. It's part of the organism that is life, and there's healthy connected tissue there. Whereas nostalgia is a place where we escape. He says a wonderful line: nostalgia evokes the past only to bury it. Right, and yeah, I mean, and so where does that come from? Like, why does one person remember something, one person be nostalgic for something? It essentially boils down to, do you have any connective tissue or not? Like, had you gone back to Montreal after basically abandoning everything and just like wishing that you could go back, like, I wish I could learn, but I don't have time, or I don't feel motivated, or it doesn't talk to me anymore, but I remember the days, you would go back with nostalgia.
I guess.
Most probably. I mean, I can't tell you, but most probably, Vaharaya, that's how a lot of people talk. Vaharaya, a lot of people, if only I could be back in Yeshiva, I wish I could go back to Yeshiva. And it's like, okay, nobody in the history of ever has gone back, so I call BS. Right. But I'm saying that's nostalgia. Memory is, holding on to not holding on to the past, connecting to the past, and then bringing it with you. And that's the most beautiful thing. So you're saying that you basically started by something very almost small. Like, it doesn't seem like you had a whole massive project. You're like, okay, I'll learn Gurus Hashem. Like, who can't learn Gurus Hashem? But then you realize all of a sudden, wait a second, I have this brain here. It works. It feels good to activate it. And then suddenly there's all this other opportunities, right?
Yeah. So I saw it as, I mean, obviously I wasn't like I was just doing Purim parties. I was teaching.
Right.
I mean, I would teach people serious Chassidus from the very outset. I wasn't doing sort of very watered down material.
Right.
I just thought these people are clever. They're stimulated by ideas.
Right.
They'd find Hemshech Tov Shin Gimel fascinating.
Right.
Different levels you're not in.
Yeah.
You know, like
Isn't that an amazing Hemshech?
it's fantastic.
I don't know, man. You're my soul brother. RaNaT, Toshin Gimel. That was the first Hemshech I learned.
Yes, and like
I taught it to myself in Masifta.
I'm Toshin Chav Gimel. I love teaching Toshin Chav Gimel, the Rebbe's Hemshech on Toshin Gimel.
And look at hey.
Yeah, I think it's
that's not Toshin Gimel.
Yeah,
I guess I didn't realize that.
Gimel Dagas are not in. So it's
yeah.
You know, I just felt like
it doesn't talk so much about Achtaras and Malchus, though. Does it? Or like openly it's on Toshin Gimel?
Yeah.
All right, my bad. I gotta go learn it again.
I mean, okay, we'll talk about it afterwards.
Off camera.
Off camera. I think I found these things fascinating.
Toshin Gimel is a beautiful Hemshech.
And so
Toshin Chav Gimel also, just for the record.
If you isolate the ideas, obviously they're going to struggle with the Dibra Maskell and some of the stylistic of the Maimah. But if you're able to engage them with thinking about how will and pleasure and everything, you take like the maamorim in the beginning, Samach Vav in Lech Lecha and Vayera, about Tainager Nutzen,
right?
You know, which
comes
deeper.
first, right?
Yeah. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's a fascinating pull.
So why would I start talking about
Freud?
No, just like why would I? You know, the sort of the marketable Chassidus is actually not as stimulating as that. Why are we hiding the Mayonis in that way? So I was always a little bit crazy about what I was teaching people, and I found that engaging, and I gained a lot from the people I was learning with. I mean, these are really clever people, and they were able to feed back information. And sometimes I'm learning these people, and they tell me, "Oh, this is like in this philosophy. This is like in that philosophy." So I hadn't studied philosophy, and I'm starting to get like sort of feedback about how this aligns, how it's similar, how it's dissimilar, and we were having these conversations about the range of things. And so I realized that there's an opportunity here. That if they don't speak the language of Chassidus, they speak other languages.
Right.
So I just have to learn. I speak to them in English. So it's just another way of. It's just a language. It's about figuring out in sort of the paradigms that they're familiar with, how to communicate. How can I do Hafatzas Mayonis in those in that container, so to speak. And so I started, reading a bit more, expanding my ideas. And then I started writing. I started writing some essays and some academic pieces.
You didn't start with this book, though, right? Because in this book, you referred to a few other essays.
Yeah, so I did some earlier material where I sort of developed my writing skill. I didn't really know how to write.
Certainly not academically. That's a whole different language. It's a whole different language.
So I had to learn that skill. I'm still not very good. I still need to. It's a struggle. I find it difficult.
Your writing is thankfully understandable. Please do not get more academic on us. Thank you.
I'll try. No, but I'm not saying I had an inferiority complex. I just find it not a pleasurable act to write. I don't enjoy writing.
I don't think anybody does.
I think some people that people who are trained to write from a very early age, they can write. It just flows. Once they get into the
every writer, every famous writer says they hate writing, but I don't know. Maybe they're lying.
Yeah, so I had to learn a little bit how to do that, and also to think in categories. Like I think that there's lots of things in the academic system which are not desirable, or we should seek to replicate them in any way. They're just functions of an old bureaucracy that just is the way it is. But it definitely helped me sort of clarify my thinking, learning how to make arguments that are more solid. So I found that to be enriching. And again, it opened up doors. It meant I was engaging with people that otherwise wouldn't treat me as seriously.
Right.
There's a lot of snobbery in these parts.
Sure.
And it opens doors. It gives a credibility, which you can argue whether. I mean, I would argue that it's a failing of the system, that it's not open to people who take alternative routes of education.
You argue that in the book.
Yeah. I think it's a flaw in the system.
How have people taken?
If you can't beat them, join them. Sort of.
How have people taken to that argument?
I think that you have the people who are open and the people who are not open. It's just. I mean, I don't. It's not really an argument. It's just a declaration of war. Like this is out of order. I didn't feel that I'd spent 8 years in yeshiva and attained a certain degree of scholarship, both in Nigla and in Chassidus, to come here and be looked at as if I was like had just like never opened the book, or like was not a worthy intellectual sparring partner.
Right. It's almost like the famous kind of immigrant story where like you have the guy from Russia who's an engineer, and then he comes to America and his degree is worthless, and he has to like clean the toilets because like his engineering degree wasn't given by the right accreditation society. In the meantime, he's a smarter engineer than everybody else, right? And so it's like you're saying you come to Cambridge and now all your Chassidus counts for nothing, but if you learn a few books by Nietzsche, then you're all of a sudden you're a chacham, right? And it's like what's that like? I learned a body of work. What I have to say is very interesting, because before I met you and I read this book, I wouldn't say I felt it was apologetic, but it's certainly like, because I didn't know you, you are playing on their turf, so you're constantly having to like
Justify myself.
Justify. So in a sense, it is an apologetic, right? It has to like explain it, so like why you belong here, right? And so it's really interesting to see how like you, in many ways, the book does in a way misrepresent you. No, I'm saying because like the book is.
It wasn't written for. It wasn't written for the Bible.
No, it wasn't for the Lubavitchers. It was written for people who are like skeptical from the outside. And it's just interesting to see like how this doesn't like you. It's very clear that this book is written one way and you're thinking of it a different way.
Yeah,
it's very interesting. It's very interesting. Do you want to describe a little bit? Do you feel? Let me ask the question this way: if the book wasn't written for Lubavitchers, and it's clear that a lot of it isn't, right? Because like no Lubavitchers, maybe some Lubavitchers heard of Levinas and Derrida. I don't know if any Lubavitchers heard of Kristiva or. I'm saying like there's a lot of stuff in there the Lubavitchers don't know about and probably don't care about. But is there a part of the book that you feel is for Lubavitchers? Like, is there something relevant to this conversation?
I think I would say that, and this is just anecdotal, I think there are some people who study Chassidus, study Torah, Nigla, Chassidus, and to a decent level, and they have an inferiority complex in the wide intellectual world, because the way that they've learned Chassidus has not been so sharp, maybe not so intellectually rigorous, and maybe they have a good reason to have an inferiority complex,
right?
But that can elicit a behavior pattern where they sort of say, it's all nonsense. I got, like all this academic stuff. They're a bunch of idiots. They know what they're talking about.
Right.
You see, they just like act like kids. They're sort of fighting against that. I don't want to be for teva. The academy gave me a lot of training and understanding of how to think about Chassidus in a way that I didn't get from other places.
Right.
It forced me to think in certain terms, which I think have been fruitful and helpful in my avodas Hashem, in my limud Torah. So I'm not going to bite off the hand that fed me.
Would Nosson Gurari have benefited from academia?
I don't think so. I mean, I think he was a superior intellectual. I think he got there by himself.
Because the reason I'm asking is not just to play some kind of a silly thought experiment. It's more, do you think that for people do you think it's possible, even in extremists, for like Lubavitchers who want to reach that kind of rigor that you're talking about, can they reach it without academia?
Yes, definitely. With it, and as you say, like what could be useful within a Lubavitch context of what the book's done is it's shown, I'd like to think, the profundity, the insight that the Rebbe Rashab had, such that it's become, people are, for whatever reason, are impressed by the broader world and what's considered important in the broader world, and to be able to appreciate that Chassidus has depth of understanding and insight, such that and it's not to be like, oh, we're better than everyone. We don't need the rest of the world. Just to put it into that context, just to lift it up as a as like sort of sonic substantive. And I think there's a deep down when the inferiority complex that people have reflects a sort of a lack of confidence in Chassidus. Right. It's like the same thing with Torah. In Torah in general, like Torah and science debates and all these types of things, like they're scared. Right. They're scared they might be shown up.
Right.
I think people should feel tremendous confidence in this body of material that we're zeicha to have, and to go far with it. Not just be. I think some of the reasons why people learn it in a slightly superficial way is they don't believe it could. What's the point of putting the effort in?
Right.
What are you going to get if you dig and dig and dig? What are you going to get? Another gematria? Like what?
Right. I mean, I accept what you're saying for sure. It rings true, but I have to tell you that in a way, I see something else in the book. You're saying that the book. I could just tell you what my experience reading the book. I read most of the book, and I actually read a big chunk of it twice. What you're saying is that you've heard back that Lubavitch see how impressive or how profound Chassidus can be, and that talks to them. And yeah, no doubt, some people feel that way. I can see why they'd feel that way. But in my experience, I didn't really need anybody to tell me that RaNaT's profound, because I remember having that experience myself when I learned it. What I did feel.
Do you think? 1 second. Do you think you're from the majority of people who've studied Chassidus in that style?
No, if I'm being honest, no. That's why I'm saying what you said rings true.
Right.
But my personal experience is that that's not what impressed me. What impressed me was your ability as an author to take it seriously and to talk about it in an English or in a language that I usually can only find outside Chassidus. Right? And I think that's, I don't know if it's equally as important, but it's also important. Like, I think it's great for some people who maybe never had in Yeshiva the experience of like seeing a maamorim talked about in a serious manner, for them just to see that happen. Yes, for sure. But I think for a lot of people, and for those people too, it's also important to not just see that the maamorim is taken seriously, like, oh, this maamorim is really, really special, but that someone can engage with it on a serious level and bear fruit. Like the maamorim can bear fruit. That I think. Also, the maamorim bearing fruit can also be like chalked up to belief. Like if the Rebbe said it, it's important. But what about the fact that you can engage with it and kind of tussle with it and come out with something of your own and something profound and something gripping and arresting, like you said earlier. Like it's something muscular, like going back to jiu-jitsu. But I think it's important. I think the reason I keep on going back to that is because I think it's very, like, when you kind of give the analogy in something so different. That's what a mashal is. Like,
It's be a
maamorim's in your head, right? So it's like, what's it mean to be muscular in your head? Well, okay, so it's the mashal is the physical activity that everybody can understand is muscular.
You know, my one of my sons.
So just to finish off the mashal, like, everybody can understand that jiu-jitsu is a amazing body of knowledge, but it's something else when you see somebody engage with it and like, okay, now I get it.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. One of my sons said to me, having read it, that it's nice to see Chassidus spoken about in English and it doesn't sound stupid.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I feel bad because I don't want to critique other people who write Chassidus in English, but there's a certain stuck in two worlds,
right,
when people are writing, and so you can hear them thinking in Hebrew instead of writing when they're writing in English. And so that's what I tried to do, to varying degrees of success, but I appreciate.
Well, you write about it in your book. One of the things that really interested me, even though it wasn't really being to the actual, I don't know if we clarified, this is a book about Hemshech RaNaT. Yeah. And the story of Rabbi Greenglass brought as Akdama, which explains why Reuven's so interested in RaNaT in the first place. But the book is about RaNaT and how the Rebbe Shab's philosophy, Rebbe Shab's Chassidus can speak or has something to offer to the world of philosophy and so on. But what did I say? Oh, one of the things you talk about is a problem of translation, right? And it's actually something that got me in a bit of trouble recently, where I suggested that if I was to be asked for a quick fix for the Lubavitch, for in general, the Yeshiva system, in general, I don't offer from the peanut gallery. Like, I think it's silly for me to, but this one actually could be enforced relatively cost-free. I suggested that they start davening in English. Out loud, not just like in their mind.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the language we speak. Articulate yourself in that language. Like, learn to articulate yourself in the language that you speak so that you don't live in two different worlds. This idea that you can just kind of toggle between Hebrew and English on a dime is not how it works,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because what ends up happening is you have people with a very primitive Hebrew and a sophisticated English. When they translate the primitive Hebrew, or even if it's sophisticated Hebrew, gets translated into a primitive English, and the sophisticated English is only experienced in Dvarim Acherim. It's not healthy.
There was once a Chassid who used to daven, and when he would daven, he would translate into Yiddish.
That was precisely the story I said when I gave that example. I still got in trouble, but it's okay.
So what was his word? He said, even Birchas Krishma, when you're not supposed to speak.
Das für Nefesh Bahamis.
Yeah, my Nefesh Bahamis versteht nach Yiddish.
Yeah.
So,
But Yiddish is okay. English doesn't work.
So you're saying that you can toggle between Hebrew and Yiddish in a way that you can't do between Hebrew and
I'm
English?
saying the critics see the wisdom of that up to the extent of Yiddish, but English starts getting kind of touchy, and I
always encourage my talmidim, my children. So before I was here, I was working in Masifta. I made them, daven in English.
That's really interesting. So you taught him a sister before you came here.
Yeah.
What would you tell your Masifta self? Not if you went back in time, or it seems like you kind of left. You're on your way out.
I've moved on.
You're on your way out. You weren't there for too long.
No, I've moved on. I don't have an expertise in that. I mean, if I have an expertise in anything, I definitely don't have an expertise in that.
Right.
I think obviously, I homeschooled my kids and stuff, so I care about chinuch, and I think the most valuable thing in chinuch has been me on the receiving end, and I've seen the impact of being on the teaching end is actually treating people with respect, treating them as mature people.
Right.
If you treat someone maturely, they behave much more maturely. Taking someone seriously. I was just recently, I went to Toronto to Fabreng with the girls' high school. And it was a very, very engaging experience. And some of the feedback was, what it reflected was like, I just didn't look at them as like little girls. I saw them as serious people.
And this was reflected like in a positive way? They appreciated it.
They appreciated it. And sort of, I think at the core of it was, I don't think I said anything particularly interesting or extraordinary, but it was just, if you interact with people in a way that you take them seriously, it's meaningful, it builds their self-esteem. They care about, they'll begin, you could say it's quite manipulative, but they will care about the things that you care about. And I just think it's a polite way of treating people.
It's not. I don't see it manipulative at all. I mean, it's respectful. Yeah. It's respectful. I mean, I've been going on this for years. I mean, whoever listened to me before I had a podcast, but I'm saying I've been talking. Whoever listens to me now, but God bless all of you. But
I'm just here so people can listen to you a bit more.
No, I'm just saying, like, I mean, this is like right up there. This is right up on my list. Like, we actually mentioned it earlier in the podcast. It's a cycle. Like when you decide a priori that people are not up to it, right? So you give them less.
Sure.
Then they don't hear anything. Then they're not interested. Then there's no one to talk to. Then you don't give them anything more, and it's like you're caught in this vicious cycle of shallowness. Like a lot of the people you mentioned, there's like a lot. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. You open up a essay on Chassidus or a translation of a maamorim, and it's like, why do I feel like I'm back in high school? Where is a material that I can read that makes me need to read it again, and with the confidence that it's worth reading again because I have to process what this writer is writing. Like he's really thought it through. Like, and to your point, I think what you find every time that you speak elevated, and not elevated pretentiously or arrogantly, elevated that I make videos for a living. The simple rule of making videos, or really any art, is you have to appreciate the work that you're making. Right? Not because you're the most important person in the world, but because if you don't care about this piece and the story that you're telling doesn't talk to you, why in the world would you assume it would talk to anybody else? If it talks to you, there's a chance it'll talk to other people, right? And you hope that you develop an instinct to know what that it is, but it has to talk to you. So just talk about Chassidus in a way that engages you. Don't dumb it down for this imaginary crowd. Try to talk in a way that talks to you, and hopefully that elevates the crowd, right? And especially in today's world where we were talking before the podcast about how like it's so hard to get people to come to an event because they can come to an event or they can watch a video on YouTube of, I don't know, the world's most proficient violinist in a concert. It's like, how it's very hard. Our youth or whoever you're concerned about are swimming in a world of access and ideas. People are talking to them in sophisticated fashion. People are talking to them and making them feel smart. If you're not going to talk to them on that level, someone else will and is, right? And so much of the paranoia about like, oh my God, people are listening to this, it's that. It's a realization that we're not giving out the goods. Like if you believed that Chassidus was sophisticated and deep and profound, and you believed that you were communicating it that way, why are you so worried that they got the goods? You've got the goods.
I think that this, on the part of the people who are trying to express, exude, share Chassidus, there's, it's difficult, and it requires a lot of introspection. I was very affected by the story of one of the French shluchim who was translating the sichos into French, and he asked the Rebbe how should go about it, what should be the process of translation. So he said, you learn the sicha, good, and then you should close the book and write it in your own words.
Really?
And this...
How did that story get forgotten so quickly?
It's on one of the Jam videos.
But I'm saying, like, it's not a practice.
And, well, you think like Jonathan Sacks, that's sort of one of the ways his Torah studies.
No, but I'm talking in our circles, it's not the feeling you get when you read a translation.
For sure. I mean, it's just thinking about in different, as you say, like thinking in different... I was going into a particular direction, talking to people who are familiar with continental philosophy. Right. That was like my audience. I was trying to help them engage with Chassidus. Right. But everyone has to think about their audience. And like just the very act of thinking about your audience is already, that should be a basic expectation, a prerequisite of how you enter into any sort of farbrengen, any speaking engagement, any activity. Right. It doesn't matter what I have to say, or what I want to say. What do they need to hear?
Right.
Whatever they need to hear, I have to figure out a way that can be meaningfully communicated to them. Right. And I think that's my sort of challenge as an educator, what I need to do. And you've got to, I think it goes back to sort of the earlier discussion we had about the variety of Chassidim and about how people are able to really think about Chassidus on their own terms. Mm. And then it comes up, it then becomes individualized. It's sort of the Zekeli Van Vehul rather than Elekei Aviv Ari Menhu type of approach. We have to explain these types of things. So our audience is backend.
Our audience is already 4 L'chaim's in and we're behind. So
right.
L'chaim.
Okay. L'chaim. I think that so one of my inspirations in this regard, which gets me into a lot of trouble with the more hardcore Fachni crowd, is my obsession, and I would call it an obsession, with Avram Chaim, who I did some research on before the book, and I'm hoping to do more research going forward.
Who was Avram Chaim?
Avram Chaim was the son of RaNaT Chaim, David Tzvi Chaim, and he was a very individual style Chossid.
When did he live?
1877 to 1957.
So that is from 1877
Tafresh Lamed Ches till Tafshin Yud Ches.
So he was born in the times of the Rebbe Marash. He grew up. He was a little boy when the Rebbe Marash passed away.
He's the same age is like sort of around the Frierdiker Rebbe's age, yeah.
So he was at any time considered a Chassid or a Rashab? Like he went to, like, what's the story?
It's complicated. It's probably not the time now to do a whole biography of Avram Chaim.
Okay, fine.
That's sort of, I think, the interesting component of him and why it interjects with this sort of Homesick Lubavitch thing is there are a lot of people who are very uncomfortable with him. He was very ufgeklet.
Right.
He had his own gang.
He was in and out, basically.
Oh, he was out.
He was out.
He was out from the perspective of institutional Lubavitch.
Right.
On the whole.
He went to Pnimius?
No.
Did he consider himself a Lubavitcher?
Yeah.
He did.
Yeah, it's a Chabad. Yeah.
Okay, I've never heard of him.
Okay.
I think that's your point.
Yeah, my next book you'll find you'll.
All right, I'd be happy to come back to Cambridge, but
hopefully it'll be cheaper. But he talks about Chassidus in his own sprach, in his own language, and it's like it's so beautiful to see somebody who's learned the same books that I've read.
So which Chassidus is he talking about?
I mean, first of all, all the Alter Rebbe, Mittel Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek stuff is for him normal.
Right.
But the themes of Chassidus, which he's teaching or he's writing about, they're original.
Right.
I'm reading this stuff. I know this stuff, but I'm reading it in such a style that is getting me really excited.
Yeah, he's a mind now. There's a mind now that, like, the same way you read like an author on your shelf, and like there's this new mind, right, is now populating your mind. Like that's the same thing with him. You're saying
for him, obviously, it's very unattractive to the people who want there to be such a bittul, the Metzias,
a monopoly on ideas,
and that everyone is just a word from the book. You have this diaphany, you have this like sort of transparency. You just look at someone and you just see the Rebbe's words. You see Chassidus. It doesn't go through any filter.
Right.
And, I can see something beautiful in that.
But is that even
on
possible?
One level, but they talk about Reb Volf being the Rebbe's typewriter. Like that type of bittul. I'm not saying it's not a beautiful thing.
But that's not true.
It can be a beautiful
thing. But that's not true. Reb Volf is not the Rebbe's typewriter.
No, but that's what he is.
Everybody that listens to Maamorim the Rebbe said and sees how Reb Volf writes it, how's that a typewriter?
I'm not saying he was, but that idea of wanting to just be, the Rebbe's mouth, the Rebbe's feet, Gimel Shvat Tavshin Beis,
right?
Being like Gimel Shvat Tavshin Beis, that goal, that role that you're playing.
Gimel Shvat Tavshin Beis.
The Rebbe talked about when the Frierdiker could speak, and therefore it needed someone to be his mouth. So we are the hands and the feet of the Rebbe, the mouth of the Rebbe.
That's what he meant.
But I think for some people they read that as being, therefore you're just sort of a makova. Right. You're bottled to the ratzon of the reichiv.
Yeah.
But, Shliach is Mashiach is Shliach with Eser Keiches HaNefesh. This Eser Keiches HaNefesh.
Right.
This is the struggle. Do your Eser Keiches HaNefesh come and just become narrowly defined by a set of priorities? Or is there something unique about you? Is there something individual about you that only you can contribute?
Right.
See, I think when you start talking about what was the Alter Rebbe's Chiddush of Chabad, that once you start, and why everyone was so against it, the other Chassidim, once you enter into Chabad, that means you're bringing in subjectivity,
right,
individuality.
Right.
So no one, ein adam zeh misbah seichel chaveri. So if we all think differently, ein desem shavis,
right,
and we're focusing on Chabad, then what we're actually opening up is a can of worms of people, being different and not being identical.
Fragmentation. And,
I see in Chaim, I'm not saying he's perfect.
Right.
The reason why I like him is because he's a bit more relatable. I mean, it's like when you start talking about, certain types of Chassidim or Rebbeim and everything, you don't feel that attachment and connection because you realize it's beyond your means. But this is a person who, learned a wide range of stuff and he was able to blend it, integrate it, and meaningfully communicate Chassidus in an inspiring way,
right,
to an audience that otherwise, he was Makarev.
Who was he writing for?
He was writing for the intelligentsia.
Oh, so he was like a prelude to some of the Lubavitchers today who write to the academics and so on. He was doing that back in the day.
So he was Makarev Zalman Shazar.
Oh wow.
He was Makarev Adin Steinsaltz.
Wow.
He was Makarev all these people Professor Hugo Bergman came to Shiurim. He was able to access people because they respected him.
Right. He must have read other books also that most Lubavitchers wouldn't read. Like he must have been.
No, he was. But first of all, Lubavitchers in those days were not as it wasn't in RaNaT's house. There was Tolstoy.
Right, but you're saying that Lubavitch was more open-minded then?
I'm not saying. I think those categories don't make sense. Being open-minded,
tolerant. The RaNaT read Tolstoy.
I didn't say RaNaT. I'm just saying
he allowed it in his house. Well, look, he was lucky to live before the advent of Feldheim Press, so didn't have a Breder. I mean,
no, I don't want to start analyzing what books they had in the house.
You know the famous riddle. What time would you rather live in? Under the Tsar without Feldheim Press, or not under the Tsar with Feldheim Press?
Oh well, this is why you shouldn't have L'chaim by your podcast.
I'm just gonna start.
See, I respect people who are complicated people, and afal pikein, they have a deher.
Right.
Like the deher doesn't come from them being parrots.
Right.
But with all
it's
of
not
the
inevitable.
exposure,
it's not inevitable. It's not inevitable. There's a ayin be'emtza. Right. They could have gone a different way.
Totally.
And that is almost, to me, that is like the foundation of the struggle of general identity, like Yiddish identity, because how do you quoted the Sholom, Zekeli van Veu. How do you make the Eibusher yours without, for a moment at least, considering him not being yours? Like, on one hand, like, wait, am I going to be a kaifer? Am I going to throw it off? But if I never have, I don't know how that works. I don't know how that mechanism works. Because if I never have a moment of true beginning or true ending of what was past, then how do I have my own beginning? Mm-hmm. And but are you allowed to seek out the ending of the emunah that your parents gave you? Like where do you end up in that space? Like it's such a, like, how does that work? Like, how do you make identity yours without being a kaifer or a nifrit or a very bad thing, let's say, in between? Like, what's the ayin be'emtza? What's the ayin be'emtza look like?
Well, I think, like, for example, with Chaim, what's fascinating is that it wasn't automatic that he was a chassid of the Rebbe Rashab. First of all, he had a big father. Right. So he was a chassid of his father.
Right.
But to become...
which itself begs a question. There used to be people who were Mysticism, right?
Right. But the idea of becoming Makusha is a choice.
Right.
So his relation, the Frierdiker Rebbe was like as younger they were like more like a friend level. They were both sort of like princes in Lubavitch.
Right. But what happens for someone who doesn't have that situation? Someone who grows up in a typical Lubavitch. I think also, like, for you have a benefit. Although I don't want to downplay your journey, you have a benefit where you have a very sharp beginning point. You chose this. Mm-hmm. Maybe you were much younger, and so it's not the same as choosing as an adult, but you still chose it. Yeah. Someone who's born into this, always there's this kind of lingering thing where, like, on one hand, is this really mine? On the other hand, like, was suchst du, was kriegst du? Like, and they're both valid kindness, I feel like looking for issues is probably not the best strategy, right?
It's taking you 12 episodes to come to this realization.
No, some people are getting.
Is this the last episode?
Some people are getting to me, man. No. I mean, look, what some people don't understand is that I was never convinced. I'm not like convinced that this is the right thing to do. This is the only thing I have to do now. So, I mean, this is what I've got. But the question is, like, should people look for it? I mean, maybe the answer is that if you're honest with yourself, inevitably there's some kind of mashber. Growth entails creative destruction. Like you grow up, the ideas of your youth don't last if you keep them static.
Anyone who's honest with themselves will find a moment where they feel slightly alienated,
right,
and disconnected,
Right.
and
It happens by
uninspired.
it happens by itself. You don't have to look for it. It's there. You have to ignore it. But
And as we were describing before, that doesn't have to be that's humbling. It doesn't
Right.
have to be, as you say, a mashpeh. It doesn't have to be a breaking moment.
Right.
It can be an inspiring moment. Then,
Right.
now I can see things clearly. I haven't got baggage.
Right.
I'm starting from a point of where I am now,
Right.
with my memories and everything. So, what is my journey going to look like?
Right.
And to continue growing. I mean, you would hope that these points happen at fairly regular basis.
Right.
You want to, because otherwise, where are you going to get the impetus to grow?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, isn't that also in the Akdama Sharichud V'Amuna, like Shavat Tzadikom? What's the expression? I'm forgetting now. But I had a red-eye flight. What was it? You also don't.
No, I don't have an excuse.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. We'll edit that out. But the idea is that like every time that you climb a level, there's an Ayin Be'emsa, which is, I guess the idea there is that that's what you need the chinuch for in the beginning. You need a basis with which you kind of
Don't
gives
fall
you
off the wagon.
the tools.
Yeah.
It's almost like you need the tools to be able to kind of reclaim yourself. Like someone climbing up a mountain, like the mountain climbers, let's say. That entails falling all the time, but they know how to get back up. They know how to fall properly in a way that they can climb again. And it seems like you obviously you don't have the time to go into Rabbi Chaim, and I look forward to coming back after I read your book on him. But certainly there is. I mean, this is something that I've been railing about this whole podcast. I mean, I shouldn't say the word railing because I hope it doesn't sound like that, but it's something that's very important to me, and I mentioned a few times on the podcast about how there's no question that the Chossid used to be more of a topic of discussion, at least.
Mohus.
Yeah, no, but like the struggles of the Chossid, like the Chossid wasn't inevitable. The Chossid wasn't like we assume. Like we can assume fait accompli is all he's gonna do what the Rebbe told him. It's all gonna work out, and he's good. And maybe when someone will argue, isn't that beautiful? Like now we're more sure, or we've kind of lowered the standards, or we've shifted the standards. There's something beautiful about. Something very human about realizing that the Chassid is not inevitable. Nothing's inevitable. Why should this be any different? And only a Chassidus that thinks it's inevitable thinks that it's okay to mail it in with a half hour before davening every week, right? Like, if you know it's not inevitable, so you have a choice to make. Mm-hmm. Do I make this real or not make it real?
I don't.
I'm not trying to knock the half hour.
There are thousands of shluchim on this. I don't know. I think being on shlichus helps in that regard.
Why?
Being isolated means you much more quickly confront your limitations.
Interesting.
So the things that you thought were b'derech memela,
right,
eventually sort of go away, and you realize, oh, I thought that was derech memela. Now I have to work on it.
Right.
I can't take that for granted.
Right.
And the more isolated you are, you haven't got like a local community to even just davening shachar mincha with a minyan. Dressing up as a from Jew
helps
3 times a day. Gives you, just sort of keeps you in the zone, which can be a good thing for some people who need that sort of communal support. But as a shliach, you're confronted with yourself. It's a very individual pursuit. You're on that desert island.
Right.
What do you have to take with you on that desert island with you?
Right.
And you sometimes realize the things that I thought I had aren't real. I was just saying them, but I didn't really mean them.
Right.
And now I have to decide. How am I gonna make that Pnimius stick?
Now I have to stay up at night and write the RaNaT because that's the thing. That's my dearest chayfetz. Like at the end of the day, all of us to some extent are on a desert island, and how we live on that desert island is determined by the one thing that we choose to have on that desert island.
Well, yeah, even people who came to be in communities now live in.
I'm talking for myself.
People
here.
live in a virtual world now,
right?
And the implications of technology are that people think about themselves in a way of slightly detached from reality.
Sure.
And so, I think there's there's a way in which everyone can possibly relate to that. I think shlichus it's a very stark realization of these things, but we have to confront ourselves and say, what is my Pnimius? Like what do I actually really care about?
Right.
And you know, how long can you keep bluffing yourself that you care about something? I think just being around people, also having to deal with so many different types of people, no one's impressed with your bluff.
Right.
You haven't got anyone who's going to give you the street cred. Who's going to say, "Oh wow, look at him! He's schnipping, the hats this way and that." No one cares about anything.
Right.
All of this like cosplaying that you do as a Chossid, so you're dressing up as a Chossid, and it gives you no credibility in the world that you live in.
Right.
So you eventually move on, and you start thinking, wait a second, what are my fundamentals as a Chossid? Like what matter to me? How do I want? How do I want to educate my children? Like what is real?
Right.
And I think I'm grateful for shlichus. I'm not saying that was the kavanah of shlichus, for sure. Maybe I'm a bit too preoccupied with that. I should be more preoccupied with other people. But I think it gives a person. I think it's one of the tremendous gifts the Rabbi gave us.
Right.
The opportunity to really confront who we are and become better versions of ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I know you said before we began talking that you don't want to talk about postmodernity, but I think you kind of stumbled right into it. I mean, in my understanding, and I am no expert on this whatsoever, that's my understanding of postmodernity. Like precisely, like if you have to kind of distill what is postmodernity, it's that realization that, if modernity was a rejection of the kind of traditional religion that bound people together, and instead everybody's going to come together through reason, postmodernity was like, no, that doesn't work either. Like everybody is essentially on their own island. Everybody has to deal with their own reality. Everybody makes their own reality. Everybody crafts their own reality. Everybody faces their own reality and shapes their own reality, right? And I think it's so true. I mean, I think I know you discuss this in the book, not just mention it, but like Chassidus very much does, like when you look at it through that lens, Chassidus is in that sense so postmodern. Not postmodern and maybe the sillinesses of postmodernism and the attendant nihilism and other stuff that comes with. But Chassidus really, it's like the individual and God. That's all that there needs to be. That's it. That's the whole enchilada. Like the individual has his God, right? Every Yid has his Eibishter, and that's it. Like
That's why we're so terrible at living in communities.
We're good to go. It's probably true to some level. I mean, I think on the deepest level it shouldn't be true, but I think it makes sense, right? Like, it makes sense where like you're grappling with these kind of things. It's hard to. I think even one of the Rebbeim mentioned like sometimes because Lubavitch is like think about the Eibusher the whole day, like they're missing the Pnimius of the Tumistic Yid who just comes to shul and davens. If you normally Yid, like you're too busy grappling with Madrigas and Aaron Seif, and like so Minyan becomes less valuable, less precious.
Like, I think I've also felt that the activities on shlichus, you want to attract everyone, and you realize like, what am I selling? I'm selling individuality.
Right.
And there are some people who want community.
Right.
And I've had to sort of learn how to try and be a bit more communal, just because that's just like a need that people have.
Right.
But I don't think ideologically that's what I'm selling.
Right.
Ideologically, I'm trying to sell that Bishvili Nivra Elam and Lama Nivra Adam Yechidi, and we have to figure out what does it mean if you're the only person in this world? Yeah. Is there a point of Yiddish? Does your Yiddishkeit make any sense if you're the only person in this world?
It's so fascinating that you bring that up. I mean, my favorite. I know you mentioned that you love their Rishimis as much as you've learned them or understand them, but they love their Rishimis. I also do, and my favorite Rishima by far, and I didn't cover all the Rishimis, but from the ones that I've learned, my favorite by far, I think it's in Kvitz Memhei. I don't know, but it's about Lama Nivra Mechidi and Kol Mash Levatala. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about with all the underlines? And basically, that like develops a kind of like thesis. It's very interesting. It's like a mathematical thesis almost. Like 1 leads to 2, 2 leads to 3. And basically the outcome is if everything if everything was created for a reason, and not just everything, but every happening and every encounter and every circumstance was created for a reason, and that reason is to make this world the way the Eibusher wants, and so through Torah mitzvahs. So then anything that Yid encounters, his own individual reality, his own individual circumstance that no one else can experience besides him or her, that is created by God. And at that moment, it's only him and God and the world alone. And it's up to him to see how does this moment lead to Torah mitzvahs. I mean, that's the most existentialist, postmodern idea you could get. Ad k'dei kach, that there's a brackets there, where the Rebbe says, and this that you care about another Yid is not really because he exists, because you're in the world alone with God, but because the Torah commands you to care about the other Yid. And that could sound like very cold and harsh, like, well, we can't have camaraderie, but it's almost a realization that on some level, there is at least a side of us that's very alone in this world, an existentialist. Like we're trapped in our own reality that nobody else can fathom. We're all very alone. And the way through that, the way out of that loneliness is, I guess according to this, the only way out is through a connection to the Eibusher, right? And ultimately, I mean, it rings true in Chassidus in general, but it does kind of bring out a different flavor, right?
Yeah,
so
it can go in different directions.
So you're talking about the community that you build as a necessity, like only because like the community that you build, like b'diavad, like because like you need to. It reminded me of that. But I do want to.
I think what do you bring to a community? What do you want a community to be? A community is not the way that you flatten everyone else.
Right, of course not.
It's you want people to have something that they're bringing, and I think all of us individually, I want to be part of a community,
right?
But I want, I want to play a role that is useful, purposeful, meaningful,
right,
and can contribute.
Well, that's the whole tension of community. That's the word tzibur, right? Tzadikim beinim rishayim. Like, is that really a community? Like, how do you have a community? And like the kind of the analog that people talk about a lot today, and at least in America and the frum communities, and I imagine this is true to a large extent in England as well. It's like only in the frum communities do you still find that you'll have in the same community on the same block very, very wealthy people and people that can't put food on the table. Like most of the world has segregated itself economically, and the frum community insists on having a community with these kind of extremes, which causes all kinds of chaos.
Right.
Because people feel pressure to live up to the Joneses and so on and so forth. There are reasons to separate economically, and the frum world does not accept that. And there's something very beautiful about that, but there's also an immense amount of pressure that's created as a result. That's the tension that we're talking about. Like you have individuals, and we're not communists, hopefully, right? But at the same time, we believe in community despite the differences of the individuals, which actually brings me to my next point, is that there's this, we're talking about individuality. You brought up Rabbi Chaim and the kind of the model of an individual from back then. People have asked me, okay, so you've been doing this podcast for a few months, talking about Lubavitch identity. Like, so what's the answer? No, what's the answer? What is Lubavitch identity? And at the risk of sounding like I'm deflecting, I come back to it with an image, a new image that I think about, which is in the past I used to think of, the fragmentation of Lubavitch identity as like, an egg that fell off a wall and broke, or like Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall. Where in England now, all the king's horses, all the king's men could not put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And like you have these shells of an egg splattered all over the place.
Is that going to be the name of the episode?
What's that? Humpty Dumpty? Maybe. Not bad. But I'm saying all the eggs, you have the shell splattered around. The yolk is just oozing out and kind of seeping into the mud. And it's just a very dispiriting, sad kind of story. Like, okay, so that's what you're saying about just fragmenting, and basically everybody's just broken shells, and the essence is kind of just falling away. But the more I think about it, the more, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is something that's brought in Lulav or maybe Sukkot. It's been many years.
There's no
the idea. is there what's after Lubavitch? Oh, B'yam
B'yam
Shneersohn. It has been many years. There's something there about like when the a pure air is mischalik. Like it's trying to explain how there's a schalkus without a schalkus, like the pshit in the schalkus. So I think of like a meteor that explodes. It collides with some force of nature and it explodes. And there's also a fragmentation. There's also an explosion, right? There's a bunch of millions of pieces flying all over the place. But even though that's been shattered, each one of those pieces is hurtling millions of miles an hour in some direction, full of energy, dangerously. It could ignite the whole world on fire. And I think more and more that's individuality that Chassidus sets us up for. Like that's how it works. Like there is no way to have you cannot have it both ways. You cannot have a common identity that's also full of all this fire. It just breaks apart.
Yeah, that's why
does that image ring true to you?
See, that's why I think I'd push back against this idea that there is this something that's lost, something that we have to sort of recapture, something we have to figure out. The diversity which you call us like an omelette or a meteor, whatever metaphor you're going to give, is showing the potential of how Chassidus can develop in different ways. Now, that's much more risky and confusing for a lot of people because they want to create this collective. But if we embrace, if you educate people and you infuse with them the ideas of Tanya and the rest of Chassidus, they're inevitably going to at some point think for themselves.
Right.
And when that happens, who knows what's going to happen?
Right.
And when we see it happening, we can't start complaining when we sort of drip feed into their mother's milk
right.
these radical ideas of Tanya,
right,
of individuality, and everyone has to find their chilek in Torah. So this like it's pushing and pushing and pushing this theme about Zekeli. This is my Pnimius.
Right.
Something's Pnimius. It's only my Pnimius. No one else has it. It's been this chalik. It's been this gabel in me, but Pnimius. That's what Chabad want Pnimius. That's what we're trying to get people to do. And all of a sudden, someone says, "Okay, I'm going to be a Pnimi. I'm going to be just like I'm going to be me."
Right.
And then everyone, "Oh no, don't." We didn't mean ad kedei kach. We didn't mean so much.
I didn't mean it. Right.
And there's going to be, these ideas, and we've seen in the history of Chassidim, not everyone stayed within a very narrow frame. It's got the potential to be very disruptive.
Right.
And if we're just going to hold on to this vision that everyone's going to, identify in this very particular way, then we're going to have to take out some elements of Chassidus from the curriculum because you can't. It's not fair to teach people this level of radicalism,
right,
and at the same time say don't step over this line.
Right. Right.
We've told people to think for themselves. Use your Chabad.
Right.
But no, not if it says that. This is the dangerous.
It's so true. It's so true. I mean, so much. Like when you think about the same Christopher Lasch that I was talking about earlier, he talks about the same way that he separates between memory and nostalgia. He separates in the flipping it to the future, the difference between hope and optimism. Like optimism is to him like the same thing as nostalgia. Like the past
right.
is artificial. The future is also make believe. Like optimistic. If X happened, then Y has to happen. Then Z has to happen, and then we're worried if it doesn't. Hope is a deep seated conviction of someone who is connected to the past in a healthy way. That even if things don't work out, I'm still gonna live. I'm still gonna figure something out.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about the future. I think someone asks, are you optimistic about the future of Lubavitch? Well, I don't even know what that means. Like based on what? Like do we have any example of this happening before? Like based on what would I be optimistic? based on the number of Chabad houses? Okay, perhaps, but is that the whole story? So I don't know if I'm optimistic. I don't know if there's reason to be optimistic. There's a lot of problems. Am I hopeful? I see a lot more reason for that. Right? Because hopeful is like, are there goods here or are there not goods here? Like, is there something deep that can last? I say for sure. I believe there can be. I believe there is. So, but hope is a lot more risky. Hope is a lot more, understands that things are not going to just play out in a straight line. It's going to be messy. Right. That's why I like the image of the explosion. It's not pleasant. It's risky. It's chaos.
I go back to your previous episode with your brother, which I found very moving, in that he made choices.
Right.
But it was deeply inspired. It wasn't in spite of his upbringing, but it was because of his upbringing.
Right. At the end, you're saying, yeah, there's a very moving thing to hear from him.
And I think that's, people have to be open to what the possibilities are. There's believable possibilities.
Right.
And, it's a risk. Chabad Chassidus is a risk. This is something I had a chip on my shoulder a little bit. Being a Baal Tshuva from the nuns. The time when I became Baal Tshuva was like, Chabad was like a cult.
Right.
Especially in the Mashiach sort of phase.
Right.
People were like, these people are, really, culturally...
By cult, you mean that they were practicing cult behavior? You mean that people saw them as a cult?
Just people outside of the Lubavitch
saw it as a cult.
Yeah, they just saw them as like dangerous people. Like they're just like dangerous ideas. Not because I can critique that. I think that was just part of the narrow-mindedness of mainstream Judaism. But I'm just saying, culturally, to get involved with the Lubavitch in a very overt way
came at a cost.
Yeah, I think like now it's sort of Chabad is much more popular. You've got seatings, you've got Chabad on campus. And everything. People don't, to self-identify as being associated with Lubavitch is not so risky. And then
risky or risque?
Both. And then also when you, as a Baal Tshuva, it's become much, in a lot of ways, it's become slightly more balabatish in what you're being integrated into. You're not being integrated into the type of Farbrengens that I was going to as a 13-year-old kid, hearing people Farbrengen commercial costs, right?
Right.
I think it's a lot more sanitized,
right?
For a lot of people, and I always had this chip on my shoulder, like if you're gonna do it, you need to. There needs to be a cost.
Right.
A cost.
Yeah, man.
It doesn't hurt.
Yeah, man. I'm with you.
And so I think I've grown out of that. And I think that, but I still think we need to sort of recover this sense in which this is dynamite. This material, Chassidus is doing something radically different. It's not just, if you study it academically, it just becomes, incorporated into a form of Gnosticism or Neoplatonism, and people will just rationalize it down to sort of a nothingness. But anyone who's sort of got a little bit to the heart of it all realizes that it's transformative,
right? And
it's difficult, it's uncomfortable, and we need to reignite that, embrace that, and then realize that when somebody is, we're not giving people mainstream Judaism,
right?
We're giving them, Teros from Mashiach. We're giving them something radical and alternative, and it's not the world as you know it,
right?
And when people are exposed to that, not everyone's going to come out like Rabbi Akiva.
Right.
Some people are going to go a bit crazy. Some people are going to become heretics. That's what happens.
Right.
This is why the Rambam said, Mir Nevuchim is very careful. Not everyone should be studying this stuff.
Right.
And we all of a sudden open up to everyone. Now, if you learn it properly, for sure, everyone's going to be like Rabbi Akiva.
I mean,
but we've got to be honest that if you're exposed to these ideas, it can lead to crazy outcomes.
Yeah, I look. I mean, we're kind of agreeing with each other here. I mean,
if you translate it in a way that no one understands it anyway,
right?
Then no one's going to get harmed because no one.
I don't know whether. Look. If you want to be more sociological about this, it's kind of normal that you'll see a company, let's say, that's like radically innovative, and the entire culture is about innovation and disruption, but then they succeed, and now they are the ones being disrupted against, right? So the culture gets lost of innovating, and now the goal is protection. And very often the CEO or the founder who brought them up to the second level is replaced by someone who's better at protecting and kind of consolidating. And I think if one had to describe like how did Lubavitch go from being disruptive and chaotic to being so like risk averse and like conservative and like static, right? It's probably because if I think in a way this is a compliment. This is probably because of the success, right? When it grows to a place of stability, in the sense that like people always like to bring out, look how many Chabad houses are out there, look how many kids are there in the yeshivas and so on. You come to a place where you're like, okay, we don't need to fight anymore. Now every child that we lose is a loss. Like we're not going to get any better, right? There's no point of innovating anymore. We got where we needed to. Now the goal is to make sure we don't lose. Like people will say, it's easy to make the money, it's harder to keep it, right? And so there's that kind of mentality where like we've made the money, now let's not lose it. And the problem, really, it's a problem for these companies. Usually, when the company goes into that cycle, it's only a matter of time before they're dead, because you can't play defense.
Right.
Like that's a guarantee to eventually lose.
Exactly.
Nobody wins by playing defense. Only playing defense. You have good defense, but you also have to have a proactive goal. And it seems like there's a lot of like risk averseness. We're like, you know, and I understand it. And it's also like, and also the problem also is that like once you are not so risk averse, so now like, are you sure that everything that you're doing is for the right reason, or because other underlying motivations? It's like it's easier for the individual also to kind of say, well, I know that this is pure, let's say, but again, that goes to being risk averse. You're not going to get anywhere being that way. You've got to test yourself. You've got to see, I'm going to do something. I believe it's for the right cause. Sometimes you find out. Like, if I'm doing it for the right reason, I'll keep on doing it, or the results will be good. If I'm doing it for the wrong reason, I will find out. I have to learn myself. How can we be sure that we're so settled and we're so figured out already? It boggles the mind.
But I think one statistic that stands out for me, I know there's lots of societal reasons why the world is different than the way it was 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. But with the huge expansion of Chabad houses,
right?
Befrat Chabad on campuses, how comes there hasn't been a similar expansion of Bali Tshuva yeshivas?
Or just yeshivas, period.
Well, I'm just saying, like, you know, you'd expect,
right?
Just it should multiply, and it doesn't.
Yeah, but even
in any
yeshivas,
significant manner.
Even yeshivas, period, because like there already, you're talking about a secondary result. Like you're talking, yeah, and I understand what you're asking, but I feel like you
and I
can
think
make
that's a
a sharper
reflection on us,
critique.
and I take that personally as well. I know in sort of the 20 years of Shlichus, how, you know, things were different at the beginning than they are now,
right?
In that regard, and I think it's a cheshbon nefesh we'll have to make. Are we, you know, are we communicating Chassidus to such an extent that people would be willing to make such a radical
right
move,
right,
and change their life for it,
right?
Or are we giving them something that's comfortable, that's something they can incorporate into their existing lifestyles? And are we selling them short because we're doing that? Now, we're reaching more people,
right?
Probably,
right.
We're having I'd like to think we're having a meaningful impact on a lot of people. But there's something about the radicalism that we've reined in a little bit. And yeah, it's a question I ask myself. But I want to pick up on something, on an omission on your part. I think maybe.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to do that?
Of course.
That you've picked up a lot of themes in the book, but one of the themes you haven't picked up on is gender. And it's I think that's one of the battles of our time, especially within a Lubavitch identity. And it's not directly discussed in the book, but I think it's a good starting point for a discussion about creating an environment where there's equal access to meaningful Chassidish experiences,
right,
such as living Chassidus and Darkei Chassidus, to female Chassidim,
right,
just like men have access to. And there's a structural element in our environment where that's just not. And a lot of the themes we've talked about is mainly about the male experience.
Right.
The male experience of feeling alienated, the male experience of feeling inspired or euphoric, or just this male experience. And one of the things you realize when you leave yeshiva is there are also...
There's a whole other side to this.
There's 50% of our community don't have these experiences.
Well, it's 75% of my family. I got 3 girls.
Okay, there you go.
And 1 boy.
And the responsibility for those of us who have been zeicha to various experiences, to widen access. And it's not about making sort of an egalitarian system, but just to have the opportunities for people who want it, and to not create. And I talk about these things quite a lot for different people, and you see the resistance, and the resistance is quite. I don't think it's intellectual. It's very visceral.
Right. Well, I think it comes from the same place. I mean,
and I want this platform just so we can. It should be. It should be aired. If we're talking about Lubavitch identity,
absolutely,
we have to talk about the Lubavitch identity of the whole community,
absolutely,
and not just disgruntled Bacher.
Okay, no, look. First of all, that's a fair critique. It's a fair critique. I don't think it's really a separate topic. I think it all comes down to: are you if you're risk averse, you want to keep things the way they are, and so you'll tolerate. If girls learn Likkutei Sichos or Tanya up to now, they can teach about learning that. But for a girl to, let's say, learn RaNaT, that's not what they did. That's not what they should do now, right? I mean, I think there has been over the past few years, like more girls go to seminary learning maamorim. But I understand what you're talking about. The idea of girls. I have 3 daughters, like I said. My first 3 children are girls. Do I see in them the potential for them to be engaged in Chassidus the way I see my 4-month-old son? No, I don't. I have to tell myself that they could be if they want to be. But I think that comes down to like risk averse. Like, do we stay to how things always were, or do we open ourselves up? Meaning, if you let Bachrim flourish in their own way, inevitably you'll let girls flourish in their own way. Like, it's all the same kind of captivity, or the same kind of like staying in lockstep to the past. That kind of, it just happens to be that Bachrim are the ones learning in the past, so they're learning now. But as we've been discussing, not necessarily are they really engaging anyway. But really, the main answer to the mission is more because I don't know if it's my place to talk on behalf of the female Lubavitch experience. I mean, I'm comfortable and I'm happy to talk to different women, but I don't know if this is a platform. I don't know if they're as comfortable. They're certainly... You
don't want to be mansplaining, you're saying?
I mean, I can mansplain as good as the best of them, but, I don't know if anybody's going to appreciate it. I don't know if anybody's going to appreciate it. And, I'm not here to, be the mouthpiece on behalf of the frustrated Bacher, and I certainly don't want to be the mouthpiece on behalf of people that have a very different experience than I do. I would hope, maybe, that someone... is encouraged, a lady or a younger girl to start their own podcast and explore from their side. I think there is something happening there.
It's all good. I'm just saying it's a major theme of the book.
Well, so the title of the book is The Philosophy of Rabbi Sholom Schneersohn, Language, Gender, and Mysticism by Ruben Lee. Just so that we don't omit anything from the title. I'm not covering up anything.
Good. Okay.
I'm not covering anything, but I feel like just to close the conversation and bring it full circle to what we've been discussing. It is Chav Kislev. It's still part of Rosh Hashanah Chassidus, and thinking about it now, to me, it's a new understanding of Rosh Hashanah Chassidus, where what's Rosh Hashanah? Rosh Hashanah is a new beginning. It's a scary time. And that's we learn in Chassidus that Leil Rosh Hashanah is the Mitzvah Tazah, the whole world is hanging on by a thread, right? Both in will it be renewed, and also the renewal it's chaotic, it's scary. Like all the familiarity is gone, and now it's almost like a new melech, a new beginning. And like everything's thrown out, started new. And I mean, what is Rosh Hashanah Chassidus if not a celebration of the disruption that Chassidus created, but also the disruption that it continues to have and continues to be disrupted itself. And of course, I'm not I'm certainly not advocating, and I certainly don't think you're advocating for like people just to go on their merry way and do whatever the heck they want. But like you said, ultimately it comes down to trust. Chassidus is trusting in us to be able to learn these things and do something with it, and to be empowered to do something with it in our own way. And that's what we celebrate.
Chaim.
L'chaim. Thank you very much. This has been a pleasure.
Shana Teva. Limit Chassidus. Dark Chassidus.
Amen. L'chaim. The music for this podcast comes from the album Repentant Doors by Oren Sor Nadav Vachar and is used with their permission.